It's my pleasure to introduce Andrei Petrov. He's the author and maintainer of some awesome open source projects like URLib3, SSH Chat, and a bunch of others. He made Brief Metrics, which is awesome. It'll send you like Google Analytics summaries. And he loves Python, JavaScript, and Go, so he qualifies to be here tonight. He's a Google and Y Combinator alum, and he's going to talk about what makes an open source project successful by talking about, as he would say, some successes and a lot of failures, but I think we all know a lot of successes and a small number of failures. So it's going to be videotaped. We'll have the slides up, and please welcome Andrei.
All right, so I'm going to talk about how to make open source project thrive. And I had a little thing about me, which I can't navigate now. But now it's redundant. So yeah, I like open source things. I've been doing it for a while. I have some followers in GitHub, but actually not that many. Some projects successful. I did Y Combinator and Google thingies. My startup was acquired by Google. I like JavaScript, Go, et cetera. So my goal with this talk is two things. One is to share a bunch of my tweets with you, so you'll follow me. And two, I want to share specific concrete examples of lessons. So I often see people say, do this or don't do this. And, oh, that's number 2. He did it again. Amazing. Sorry. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, a lot of times people will tell you what to do, but they won't tell you why. And then you don't figure it out till you've learned it yourself, which is why would they even tell you to begin with? So I'm trying to not make that mistake. If I missed any stories about lessons, let me know, and I'll share them after. So this will be 2 halves. One half is for people who haven't done open source yet and are looking for an excuse to do it. And the other half is for people who already have open source projects and they want to make them larger or want to have them make money or something. Whatever your motives are, we'll figure those out. So what's open source? I'm going to do something not cool, and I'm going to refer to open source as not what it actually is. So open source, what it actually is this to release something under a license that other people can use it, and they can read the original, the underlying source of the product that you're releasing. And they can make changes to it however they want. That's open source. But most of the examples I'm going to be giving about open source, I just mean having stuff up on GitHub where someone else might see it. Ideally, you would also include a good license, et cetera, but that's like next level. At least for the first half of the talk. Second half of the talk, we can be more serious. And then, so if you're looking for excuses why to open source, I'm going to give you some reasons. One reason I like, if you're working for a startup somewhere, and someday you might not be working there, it's the reality. And you write some really awesome libraries. And when you leave, if you didn't open source them while you were there, you won't be able to use them anymore. And that's pretty shitty. So it's nice to be open sourcing things as you go, as long as they'll let you. And you don't have to worry about that. You can reuse all your effort. And if your laptop gets stolen because you're in San Francisco, you don't have to worry about that, because hopefully most of it will be on GitHub, and other people have a copy of it, and they'll be happy to send it to you. When you start a new thing, especially if you're learning a new language, it happens more often than you think. So as soon as you start something, if you make a GitHub repo and stick it on there, even if there's nothing there almost, when you run into a problem and you ask for somebody for help, a lot of times you'll have to send them a gist or something, and then they'll want to run it because they can't figure out what's wrong with the gist, and then you have to send them more. You have to do this back and forth dance. Whereas if it's open, available immediately, just send them a link, and then you're done. It's much faster. You get really interesting emails from recruiters, more so than if you don't do open source things, because your email is out in the web because it's inside of the Git log. Here's a cool one. I cropped out the actual email. Much of my screenshots are cropped out, so you don't have to worry about them. But you can look them up later and see the whole thing. But I asked him, how'd you get my email? And he's like, oh, I used to work at Google where I learned lead hacking methods, and I used them to recruit people. So weird. And then you get a smug feeling of being better than other people, because you're helping the world, right? Like your efforts are being, at least they're able to be reused, whereas someone who doesn't share their work with anybody, their own work, and no one's able to benefit from it. At least not as many people in theory. So bad reasons. If you're worried that somebody might see your code, I think this is a really bad reason, because realistically, no one will see your code. You push something on GitHub, and so here's an example. I pushed this repo a while ago, where I'm literally offering money if you see it. And to this day, no one has claimed it. If you really want $5, go claim it. But I mean, try to find it, because Google hasn't indexed this. This is how much nobody cares about your code. Even Google doesn't care about it. It's not ready yet. I mean, there's lots of these, just one file. I don't want to write docs for it. My advice is don't worry about it. Take it one step at a time. Get it up there. And as you go, it'll eventually be more ready. If you stress about having it ready from the beginning, you'll never get it up. And you miss out on all these other awesome things, like all those recruiter emails. And then this is a special one. I don't have time. And I don't want to judge people. Maybe people really don't have time. But if you're in this talk's going to go on for at least half an hour. Pull out your laptop, make a GitHub repo, write a README. You'd be way better off doing that during this talk than listening to the rest of this talk. So if you don't have time, do that instead, and I'll be OK with it. So a quick survey. Who uses Python? All right, like 2/3 of you, maybe more. Who uses urlib3?
Directly or indirectly?
Whatever. All right, 5 of you. 6? All right, who uses requests?
Yeah.
All right, that's like 12, half of you. Who uses pip? Almost everyone uses Python. Well, it's a trick question. You all use urlib3, which some of you knew. OK, some of you are smart. But the rest of you. So urlib3 is an interesting example. So urlib3 is a project I wrote. It's an HTTP library in Python. Most of you know what it is. Well, no, obviously not. Most of you know what request is, HTTP library. Your request uses urlib3 to do all the interesting things underneath. And I want to go over some examples of what success is and different kinds of success. And urlib3 is one kind of success. So I published urlib3 in 2008, which is a long time ago. And I'll go over the story of how that came about. It's used by millions of people. So everyone who uses requests, everyone who tries to install something in the ecosystem ends up hitting some of my code. It only has 785 stars. It's a good amount, not that much. Request has like 13,000 or something, I don't know. And it's kind of like slowly been growing. Like ever since I launched it, it had like 1,000 downloads a month, 10,000 downloads a month. Now it's like nearly $100,000 a month. So yeah, it's something. But it's not all. It's not all roses. You haven't made it. You're not successful until someone says that your work is a piece of shit. But not only are there haters out there, but there's haters for everything, right? The other thing that's arguably more sad is a lot of the times when on Stack Overflow somebody asks, hey, how do I do retries in urlib3? The answer will invariably be, here's how you do it with requests. And I mean, if a person specifically asks how to do it with urlib3, they're answering the wrong question. But I mean, where are these people coming from that they love requests so much? And I'll go over that. There's a good reason why they're doing that, and I don't entirely disapprove. So another example of success, which is different from urlib3, is SSH chat. SSH chat was this hack I wrote. Here's what it looked like. Oh, all right, cool, it worked. So you basically SSH chat chazza.net. It's actually still running. You can try it if you like. And you get, instead of a shell, you get a chat experience. It's pretty cute. And it was just a weekend project that I hacked together. And then got 50 pull requests, people contributing, people wrote bots for it, had 1,500 stars on GitHub. Blog posts wrote got like 80,000 views, reads. I mean, that's twice as many stars as urlib3, right? But realistically, nobody's using it anymore. This was like a month and a half ago. Nobody cares. There's like 15 people online right now, and like 11 of them are bots. I go on there every once in a while just to make sure no one's freaking out. I consider this a success. It's a very different kind of success from urlib3. It just had this big, explosive growth. And honestly, I didn't really invest a lot of effort in making it grow beyond it, because it was just a weekend thing. And I'm OK with that. And then another kind of success is my dot files. So nobody cares about the dot files except me. It has like 7 stars, which is mostly like my 3 accounts and some other people. But I've been maintaining it for a long time. I will never stop maintaining it. And the reason for that is, Yeah, and like I constantly refer to it to people I know, like people are like, how do I do this? Oh, I have this in my dot files. We'll share our dot files and we'll have like our Vim configurations or whatever. And the key is that my dot files are intrinsically motivated as opposed to extrinsically motivated. So the other examples for success, I think of them as successful because other people like it. Like people download it, people tell me it's awesome, I get to speak about it. Whereas my dot files, they're personally important to me, even if there's nobody else in the world that would still have them. So intrinsic success, extrinsic success, something to think about. So before you kind of dive into making a project thrive, or building a project even, you got to decide, what do you want out of a project? Do you want a lot of users, contributors, talk opportunities, monies, recruiter emails? And all of these are cool, and all of these have different strategies for acquiring them, and I'll try to cover some. And then once you have that worked out, you got to figure out what you want to build. So the noble thing to do, of course, is to help somebody else. If you're using some libraries for work, just note what issues you're having and improve them and send pull requests and fix bugs. That's the noble endeavor. And then the more glorious endeavor is to start your own project. So if you ever become hugely successful, you'll be directly attributed for that success, as opposed to even if you're doing most of the work for somebody else's open source thing, you're probably not going to get as much attribution. That actually upsets me sometimes. Like even for URLib 3, I would argue I do maybe half the work these days, and maybe less. And some of the people that help me with it are actually doing a lot of work, and they should get more of the credit. But it's under my name. It's under github/shazza/ /URLib3. So they'll never get as much glory for whatever that's worth. So how do you figure out what to build? So this advice I feel is good for both open source or startups or whatever. You start with something, doesn't matter what it is, whatever problem you're trying to solve, and then you kind of keep track of what issues you're running into as you go along. And then you fix those problems as you go, and then you realize that the things you've solved along the way are actually more valuable than the original thing that you were solving. Then you throw that one away and you repeat for the rest of your life. Or hopefully not. Hopefully you'll be rich and you don't care. So URLib 3 is actually a really good example of that, of how it started. My first job out of school, we had to upload billions of images to S3. So this was 2008, back before S3 was cool. And there weren't a lot of tooling for it. There was like the official Java thing you'd run from Amazon. And there was a couple of other command line tools. And we did some estimates. Like I tried to upload a few thousand images, and saw how long it took. And then I multiplied that number. And it turned out it's going to take 3 weeks to upload a billion images. And then if we screwed it up along the way, it's like, oh no, another 3 weeks, which is a problem. Realistically, solving this problem was less than 3 weeks, and uploading it altogether than to just wait for the 3 weeks. So, of course, what do? We write another S3 client, which is concurrent, multi-threaded S3 client. And at the time, there weren't a lot of options for that. So we need to manage your own threads. And I just came out of school, and they would always say, managing threads is really scary. You're going to have a lot of bugs there. Don't do it. So I wrote a library for managing your threads. It's called Worker Pool. So that was cool. And then I'm like, OK, let's stick some HTTP API calls in there. For multi-thread, it'll be great. But of course, the standard library HTTP clients don't reuse sockets. They're not really, the recipes that people are using weren't thread safe. They didn't have multi-part encoding, which you need for uploading large things to S3. There was a bunch of recipes out there for how people solve these individual problems, but I needed to merge all of them into one library tool. And as I kept going, I kept extracting these things from my S3 tool. I extracted the worker pool, I extracted URLib 3. But basically, there's problems all the way down. And this is how, when you try to estimate how long how long an engineering thing will be, it's really hard because you're estimating the issue on top, but there's lots of small issues underneath you're not expecting. So URLib 3 was invented or manifested. And the interesting thing about URLib 3 is, so the solution space, I'm trying to visualize this in respect to my original tweet about build something, run into problems, solve them, discard the original thing. So my original problem, upload images to S3. I built S3 funnel. The solution space for that is relatively small. It's just like the only solution it really uses for is for uploading things to S3, right? Can't really do too many things with it. And then Worker Pool, which I built out of that, has kind of had a little larger solution space because you can do anything with threading. You can write a web server or another CDN service you want to upload to. All kinds of things you use threads for. And then there's like the HTTP solution space that came out of it, where basically everything HTTP is useful for this, whether you're crawling a website or APIs or more APIs, and everything's APIs, mostly APIs, really. So like one problem seeking that solution, a few problems seeking this solution, and tons of problems seeking this solution. So in effect, so originally when I built S3 Funnel, it was more well known than the rest of my things because there was this Amazon Q&A website where you would ask them things and people would answer. And someone asked, how do you upload multiple things to Amazon at the same time? And I said, S3 Funnel, and then a lot of traffic get driven from there because that was the only way to do it at the time. But then slowly as S3 Funnel grew and people built other tools that became less relevant, and the other ones grew way more useful and valuable than the original S3 Funnel solution. And then some people I've talked to, they would argue that the reason this worked is because back then there weren't a lot of options. So the trick is to choose any language that's reasonably old, or that's reasonably young, doesn't have good HTTP support, and then build HTTP client. But the thing is, URLib 3 didn't really grow until 2012, which is like 4 years later. So it wasn't just I was there at the right time. It was something else. And then another point people make is just find any old language and write HTTP client, which is no longer true. Like Go, for example, launched with a good HTTP client out of the box. It's not that simple. Just do the same thing over and over again, and you would always have this huge success by some metric. This is my cat. He's big. This is to remind me to have a breath, and maybe some water, which disappeared. OK. So moving on. While you're building your open source things, oh, thank you so much. I'm very coordinated. I shall now drink through this hole. I'll try not to slip. Sorry. I'm not entirely paying attention to other things in this talk right now. So minimum viable open source. So all you need to do, make a GitHub thing. And I say specifically GitHub because there's lots of other open source hosts out there. But GitHub seems to be the only one that really understands what's important about open source. When you make a GitHub repo, they ask you, do you want to initialize a README? Do you want to choose a license? And like most of the work is those two things. Whereas other things like Bitbucket and Launchpad and other ones, they haven't learned that for some reason. They should just steal it from GitHub, but they haven't. So I'm going to recommend GitHub. And then put a README on there. So a README should have, what is it? So here's this really lousy README, but it's a good example of how to start. So I wrote this tool to basically hammer a SSH server. So I was writing an SSH server, and I needed to make sure that when people are going to DOS it again, I will behave reasonably well. So I wrote this little thing that'll hammer SSH servers. And I mean, all it says what it is, how do you, what's it written in, what's the current status. So very bare minimum. You can start something like that. And then once you have that, you can make a better README file. So a license would be good. Technically, for something to be considered open source, it needs to have an open source license. I like to use the MIT license personally, but GitHub and Stack Overflow, I think, did a big thing about different licenses that you can read. Hit me up if you need a link. And then here's another example of a better README. So this is my SSH chat README. Don't have to try to read it, but kind of high level. As a summary, has my build status, which is broken, has my docs links, has a quick demo, has how to develop, has a quick start, how to deploy, another license, because why not? And then you can even go beyond that. So I've seen people embed GIFs to kind of show semi-interactive experiences and how they work. That's really good to illustrate it. Who else uses it? What are they using it for? Where can you get help? All those kinds of things. So READMEs are really important. If you want to have a successful open source project, put most of your effort on the README. If someone lands on it and can't get what it is and can't get where it's going, then they'll probably leave. So you push to GitHub. It even has a README. And you're sitting around waiting for it to become huge because it's an awesome open source project. It's going to change the world. But nobody cares. Nobody cares. So the second half is how do you make it thrive? So, all right. Unless you're very well known in the open source community, like if you're Linus and you make Git and tons of people instantly flock, you're not going to be that lucky. You need to work at it. So to make a point, my GitHub profile, I have 44 open source projects. 16 of them have like any number of stars, basically, whatever that means. And arguably only 2 or 3 of them are used by other people and are well known. So there's quite a long tail there, you'll notice. So vast majority of my 44 repos, nobody has probably ever seen, including the one where I'm offering you money. So how do you fix that? Most important thing I've seen is to ask for help. Get people to send you pull requests. You spot someone in the wild using your thing and they run into a problem, try to get them involved. Like, hey, if you fix this problem, I'll be happy to work on it with you and merge it in. Sometimes you have to bribe them. When I was doing SSH chat, one of the things that worked really well is I offered them free lessons of how to write Go if they helped me. Which, I mean, it was way more work for me than to do it myself. But at the same time, the people that I got involved, they went on to do more things. They wrote like all kinds of bots and things. And only 2 or 3 people took me up on it, but just being able to, just somebody seeing that I'm offering this kind of engagement to other people, they're more likely to get involved as well. Another key thing is when you're asking for help, be specific who you're asking. One mistake that I often make, and I shouldn't, is I'll be like, hey, I would love it if somebody did this thing for me. And you're much more effective if you said, hey, John, you should work on this thing and help me because you know it and you're awesome. And when somebody does end up helping you, this is another mistake I see in a lot of open source projects, is they treat it as something that needs to be very pure, and they don't ever want to merge anything that is deviating from their vision of it. And it's kind of hard to let go, but it's really important, especially early on when it doesn't matter. And I want to emphasize early on it really doesn't matter, because you're going to end up rewriting it anyways. Realistically, you'll stop working in a few weeks because nobody's going to use it. But in the alternate universe where you are nicer and you accept things more than you should, more people are using it, you'll get more engaged. Eventually, they understand how it works more, and they start to see the world more the way you do. It grows. You keep working on it. So if you choose that alternate universe, you'll be better off. And yeah, I already said get people involved. So one of the things I did, I tweeted these out over time. It's helpful for people that might get involved to see how the ecosystem's going, to see that you're actively merging things from people, that when people get involved, they are not wasting their time. And then another really, really important one is be nice. So even if you're turning someone down, if someone opens a pull request and it's really stupid and you disagree with it, thank them for their time, be appreciative, give them constructive feedback, offer to work with them to make it work, or offer to like, one of the things I did with SSH chat when somebody really wanted to merge something that I really didn't think fit, I'd offered if they split it off into their own SSH chat-like thing, I would offer to tweet it out and help them grow it. I would rather, if they succeed, maybe we'll merge it back in someday because I was wrong, but just offer to be helpful, be nice. Don't ever be mean. People will leave and not return. And then the next important thing is to market your stuff. So the reason nobody's using your things is because they don't know about it. And the way you fix that is by marketing it. So write interesting blog posts, not only about your project, it's like, oh, I built this, but more about the ecosystem that you're in. So for SSH chat, for example, I wrote this blog post about why aren't we using SSH for everything. And basically, I went through all the different features SSH has, and then I kind of looked at HTTP2 and how they're very similar, and why didn't we just use SSH? This has been around for like 15 years longer than HTTP2. And I mean, it's kind of a thought experiment, but also semi-serious. And there was also a list of really cool things that a lot of people didn't know about SSH. But it started off as SSH chat. So it drove a lot of traffic to SSH chat, which worked well. And then when you write an awesome post, you want to reshare it a bunch of times, but you feel sleazy doing that. So I discovered a cool way to do that. I'm going to share it with you. So OK, here's my new trick. I haven't tried it more than once, but it worked really well this time. So two things here. One, you come up with a bunch of alternate titles for your blog. So actually, I had trouble coming up with the original name from a blog post. So I messaged a bunch of people like, hey, what do you think I should call this? And they gave me some cute names. I really like this one. NSA hates it. One weird trick for secure communication. But the cool thing with all these alternate blog post names is you can share them multiple times. So you want to tweet like once in the morning, evening, next day, in case someone's not online. And then the people that have already seen it, they won't get annoyed because you're amusing them. And the people that haven't seen it, they get to see the link. And then the other thing I did is I got people involved. I reached out to them. I shared their stuff that got them to engage and retweet. And I got to name drop. All those things work well. Do them. And then people will criticize you for it. Yeah. I really want to drink some water, but I'm afraid. Anyways. So then the other one is answer Stack Overflow questions. So I have a filter trigger. Oh, man, I'm going to try this again. All right. I'm ready. Thank you. I see we've learned from our mistakes. Hey, Andre. Go long. Yeah. So yeah, I answer your little 3 questions, and people appreciate it. It only takes a few minutes, and if I don't do it first, then someone's going to answer that they should use requests. So I really have to beat them to it. So that reminds me, when you get people engaged and people kind of get involved in your project and they help you, they start getting invested in it too. So they'll be the ones that are answering, hey, use this thing instead of this other thing. Those are the people that really engage. Request is really good at that. A lot of people have helped it grow. And that's why a lot of people are answering they should use requests. That's where they're coming from. So don't worry about these screenshots. I highlighted the interesting part. But if you want to go look at the slides later, you can see the actual examples. Here, I did something good and something bad. So I'm answering a Stack Overflow question. And I said, if anyone is up for improving our documentation to this effect, that would be greatly appreciated, blah, blah, blah. So the good thing I did here is I was positive. And I said, if you do this, I would merge it. So that indicates to the person that if they're going to spend some of their effort doing this, there's a high likelihood it won't be wasted. The bad thing I did is I said, if anyone. So it was general. I wasn't calling anyone in specific. And that is largely ineffectual. And then another example is we +1 to adding something like that if you're interested. So I cropped it up, but I mentioned the person who's mentioning. So here I did a bunch of things right. I was nice. I mentioned the person. I opened an issue for them. I linked them to it. I said you should do it, and I'll merge it. So that's how you want to do it when you're answering somebody. I'll go over that later again, too. So don't worry about memorizing, because this is so important. So another one, you want to participate on Reddit and Hacker News. Maybe not Hacker News if you're not having a good day. Or even if you are having a good day, I don't know. So again, don't bother reading. But the idea is someone asked some things that weren't really important, and I went through all of them and answered. And the key is you have to feed the people who aren't just trying to be jerks. And for your own sanity, avoid the people who are trying to be jerks. That's my advice. But if someone's like genuinely trying to make advancement in dialogue, respond to them. And the big upside for that is you get more comments. So here's an example. So when you initially, if you post something on Hacker News, Reddit, or Dig, if you use that, I don't know. This is what it looked like. Each one will have the same number of upvotes, but you could have 1 comment or you could have 7 comments. Which one would you more likely to engage with? If 7 people had something to mention about lorem ipsum, you'd probably want to read it, right? So answer everything if you can, because that'll just increase the number of comments. More people will comment, more people will upload, more people will visit, increases engagement. Another really big one, which is arguably the biggest effect for your Lib3, is to sell to other projects and establish partnerships. So request author, we were speaking to each other once upon a time, and he was his original version of request was pretty shitty. Like the UX, the API was OK, but it didn't have a lot of the stuff that your Lib3 had. Like it didn't reuse any of the sockets. The redirect wasn't very good. It wasn't multi-thread safe, all those things. And I'm like, why don't you just use your Lib3? And then we ended up chatting about it, and then he ended up using your Lib3. And because of that relationship, at the time, Request was bigger than URL 3, but it wasn't much bigger. It was maybe 2 or 3 times bigger. And now it's the largest library by like orders of magnitude of most other things. So because we grouped up, Request was able to benefit from me, and I was able to benefit from Request. I didn't have to worry about the like user level APIs. I only had to worry about like the library level stuff, and vice versa. All right, one more cat. I'm going to take a swig. Cool. So once you're swimming in pull requests, what do? You monetize, right? So there's a bunch of ways to do that. And I do some startup-y things. I talk to a lot of startups. I do some freelancing. And a lot of the times I'll hear, we want to be like Docker. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. I would want to be like Docker, too. I actually worked with them because we were in YC with each other. So I've known them for a long time, and I've kind of watched them grow. Before Docker, there were DocCloud, which was a hosting service. And their strategy at the time was to build this hosting service and release all these things as an open source ecosystem around it. They released ZeroRPC. They released a bunch of other tools. And it worked OK. Their libraries were moderately useful. But they weren't getting as much usage as they were aiming for. And then they kind of dropped all that and rebranded as Docker. And then they released Docker as open source. Their main thing is open source. And then they're trying to build this non-open source ecosystem around that. And it worked really well. They raised a ton of money. They have thousands of contributors, which basically means they don't have to hire, right? Because people are going to do free work for them. No. But there's definitely a strong appeal for that. And in order to succeed, you kind of need 2 halves of your business. You have the open source business, the Docker business, and you have like their hosting thing they built around that. They're probably going to do more things that are going to make money around that. And I'm going to go over some other examples, because it's actually not a novel idea. This existed for many decades, in fact. I made a word for it. So any company where the core of the business is open source, and then they somehow make money around that, I'm going to call it corp and source. Surprisingly, no one has used that word before, according to Google. It's a pretty cool word. All right, so Docker is what we call open core, where the core is open source, and then there's an ecosystem of extensions and services around that. Now, another example of a business model they can choose from is, I didn't know what to call this one, so I asked some people online, and this is what I came up with, dog fooding. So if you haven't heard of GratiPay, it's a service where you can give money to other developers, or even non-developers. You basically give like weekly donations. And the way they make money is the same way as everyone else on the site makes money. They have their own thing on there, and you can give money to them. And the cool thing about GratiPay is they're entirely open. All their emails are open. All their meetings, their revenues, everything's open. You can check it out. Another one is the tried and true consulting and support. So like Nginx is a good example of that. They made an awesome web browser, and then they built a consulting service around it. Advertising, I'm going to say Mozilla's business model. Mozilla has tons of users. So because of that audience, they can sell those users to either Google or to Yahoo, whoever's their latest sponsor who uses advertising to make money. And then if you're not a corporation, then charity and grants is probably how you're going to be making money. And what this is, so you've probably heard of this story, the GNU-PG story. So this guy has been working with GNU-PG or GPG since the 90s. GPG is an interface that implements an encryption scheme. And he's been working on donations since. I think one year he got like $20,000, but mostly he's been getting basically nothing. And then this story about him was written in this reasonably well-known media site. And there was a happy ending. He ended up raising over $200,000, $250,000, and some of that is yearly recurring. And how did he achieve that? right? So he was sitting around for like 15 years, kind of moping around maybe. I don't know, at least that's how I feel. And nothing's going on. And then suddenly he gets lucky, I assume. someone reaches out to him, and he tells a story, and they write it up, and millions of people see it. Everyone I know has retweeted it, and they said, if you don't donate money, you're a horrible human being. So I donate money. And then, of course, he makes tons of money, so it's great. But the story here, the lesson here is that you need to do some kind of marketing, whether it's intentional or accidental. If you get lucky, make sure to leverage it. And then I kind of tried similar models. This was before this story. So I did the Stripe open source grant. I did a 2-week variant of it instead of the whole summer because I had other things to do. But they basically gave me money to work on Stripe for 2 weeks straight. And I did a talk about it at the end. You can see it online if you want. But my favorite part about the talk is how to monetize. So I made a little money from working at Stripe. And then afterwards, like, oh, I like this money thing. Let's do more of that. So of course, like any rational open source developer, I stuck this in my documentation. Like, oh, sponsor YOLO 3, give Bitcoins, give credit cards, give grants, give whatever. And it did not work as well as you would think. I mean, unless you've been paying attention, then you know how it worked. I tweeted it a bunch, and some people gave money, but I got like 15 bucks. So which I appreciate, don't get me wrong. It was very sweet. But some lessons were learned. Specifically, $15 is not very meaningful. I mean, it depends where you live, I guess. But I need, if I'm going to raise money, I need at least a chunk of amount of time where I can work on it and make advancements on the library. So half-day slots, full-day slots, that amount of money. So that's like a few $100 at least. And then asking random developers to give that kind of money is not reasonable. Because, I mean, if they're using Vim, they probably don't want to give you any money. I wouldn't want to give them any money. Really, you should be asking their employers to give money. But the trick there is you need to hack around the system that they've set up. Because you can't ask a random engineer to just use their credit card and give someone else's money away. You need to go to the marketing department or whoever is in charge of all the conference booths and all that, and reach out to them. But you need to get a hold of them somehow, so it's really tricky. And then ideally, I imagine a future where we have some NGO or something responsible for giving out money to open source, or you give a grant. But that's unlikely to happen anytime soon. So I hope more startups do what Stripe did and then sponsor, because it's hard to ask them to do it. You can't just show up at their office and be like, hey, would you give me money? So I hope they kind of make an effort to bring people in, maybe SourceGraph. But so there's actually more interesting ones that I want to add. So the Kickstarter model. So NeoVim, for example, they said, hey, if you give us this much money, we'll do all this work, which is strip out all the old bits of Vim and leave all the nice bits and stick in some new things in there. And then this one is really interesting, the Bitcoin model. I was thinking about this for a while, and I'm not really sure what to call it. But basically, this guy built this open source project that is basically a cryptocurrency. But that doesn't matter. It's an open source project. And the way he made money is by speculating on his own work. So he presumably had some Bitcoins left over that he spent rather than not. And he kept working on it and assuming that it'll be worth something someday. So that's a very novel model that I don't think we've seen very much before, and I hope to see more of, maybe, in some manifestation. All right. So to see what's in common between all of these, you have to start up with open source and then make money after. Every time I've seen an example where a startup or somebody's tried to make money out of a service and then try to have a successful open source thing around it, it didn't work out nearly as well as the opposite, where they started open source from day one. Because when you invite somebody to help you and you're basically saying to them, hey, help me make more money in this way that I'm already making money, it's not as enticing as, hey, we don't know how we're going to make money yet. Maybe you can make money some way that we can make money some way and we'll all be happy. Like Docker, I think, is a good example that a lot of startups are using it to solve their own issues. And beyond that, they don't really care how anyone else is making money. Whereas the .cloud example is kind of the opposite, where .cloud was had this specific business model, and if you were helping advance it, you knew how they were going to make money, but that doesn't necessarily solve your problem, maybe in some cases. It's definitely harder. So it's unpopular with investors, I imagine, and probably not a very sound business strategy. But maybe you start open source not intending to make a business, and then you turn it into one later. I think it's doable. So to recap, real quick, make an awesome README. And it's just going to give you a list, so you can look at it later if you want. So what is it? Add a demo, link to docs, license, how do I contribute, run tests, goals, things that your README might have. Maybe not all of them, but as many as you can fit. Push to GitHub. It's pretty important. Don't skip that one. Maybe write some source code. So some people like to write a README before they write any code. I do that sometimes. It's actually not a bad idea. Get people involved. Be generous and nice. And that means ask for help. Call specific people out. Be nice. Be generous. Be nice. Be generous. Be nice. Be generous. And promote your work. So it won't sell itself while you're writing all the code. So either get someone else to do it for you or do it yourself. And here's some examples of how to promote your work if you're looking for a list. And then just do this a bunch of times until one of them works. And realistically, there's a big luck element involved. Like you might do everything right, but you just screwed up. It didn't work out for whatever reason. And if you do it a few times, eventually it'll work. And that's true with most things. All right, so if you enjoyed this, if you want to see more of my tweets, you don't have to wait for my next talk. That's it. Thank you. All right. Anyone want to ask questions? Yes, Alan.
When shouldn't I open source my code?
When should he not open source his code? That's a good question.
They won't let you.
Right. When it's illegal, you should probably not open source it. That's a good one. So my rule of thumb is when in doubt, open source. But a lot of people, they're like, oh, they're going to steal my idea. And if you sincerely fear that, then do what you need to do. But really, as I said, nobody's going to even see your idea, so no one's going to steal it. That said, I don't always follow my own advice either, so use your judgment. Yes?
Yeah, somewhat along those lines. So if you're the employee at a company, how would you go about selling that idea to, hey, let's make this project open source instead of internal?
So if you're working somewhere else, how do you ask them about letting you open source something? So you would ask your manager and be like, hey, I want to open source this, see what they say. But the primary thing you want to sell, the primary thing you want to sell, aside from being good human beings and sharing your work with the world, and especially if it's not relevant to the rest of your business, is that ideally other people will help you develop this. So we built this powerful library. We want to do all this other work on it, but clearly we don't have resources because we need to hire. Every startup needs to hire. Every company needs to hire ever. That's just the rule. So how do we get around that? Open source it. Get people to help that we don't necessarily hire. I think that's a pretty good reason. And as long as you're willing to do a lot of the legwork for it, I think they usually go for it. It depends who you are, of course. But even if you're working at Google or something, they're usually relatively liberal. They'll make you release it under their name, but it'll still be open source. So it's not too bad. Anyone else? Yes.
Why do you like MIT license and not, say, GPL?
Right, why do I like MIT and not GPL?
So in my mind, there's 3 kinds of licenses, which is probably a horrible overview, but that's how it is in my frame model. There's a license that lets you do anything you want, whether you want to make money off of it, whether you don't want to share it back to the community, whatever. And I feel like MIT and BSD are kind of in that scope. And then there's the other extreme where it has to be open source, it must always be open source, you must release whatever you change, and that's kind of the GPL end of things. And depends on what you're working on, it might make sense to make a GPL. In fact, a lot of corporate source type things make sense to be GPL because you kind of want to prevent people from jump-starting their own business model beyond yours by enforcing open sourceness. But at the same time, I like MIT because it's an easy decision, it's very liberal, it's easy to understand, you can read it. BSD is pretty good. I mean, any license will do, to be honest with you. It doesn't matter too much, but when in doubt, just do MIT.
Yes.
When there's an open source project that kind of competes with another where they're really duplicative, what are the dynamics there? Like, how do they usually end up, coming together or one winning out?
Right. So what happens when there's two similar open source things? How do they interact? So one of the other reasons I wrote urlib 3 is out of spite. There was actually this other HTTP library, HTTPlib2, written by some Googler, that I really didn't like. It was basically this one giant init.py file. It was terrible code. It did some of the things I needed, like it reused sockets. It had multi-part encoding. I just hated it. So it could be a good motivator sometimes to build something better. And then if you do like what they're doing, then you merge. If you don't like what they're doing, then you use your spite against them. That's kind of the dynamic in that particular example. But I mean, ultimately, people have very weird reasons for using one thing over another. They just like the ecosystem. They like because it's a green theme on the website, or they read about it in a book. So there's lots of web frameworks you can use, and they're all a little bit different, but people use different ones for different reasons. So I think they can coexist. Usually one will be bigger than the rest, but it doesn't matter too much.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you wrote urlib 3 in 2008, and it sort of first became really popular in 2012.
Yeah.
What do you think was the tipping point for the library? Was it anything that you did, or?
Yeah, so 2011 is when I merged it into requests. So that was the biggest thing. Up till that point, it was growing, but it was very slow and steady. Whereas requests already had a substantial user base, and it just made it that much better. Before, HTTPlib2 was actually pretty big. Requests were like almost in the same size for a while, and then it just kind of skyrocketed from there once it added all those extra things that the other one didn't have or had. Yep.
How do you weigh like what use cases you want to support, or maybe features you want to add that maybe like you're not even using for a project, but kind of the community wants?
Right.
So how do you weigh what you want to add and what you don't want to add? So in the beginning, when it doesn't matter, just add everything. And then if you regret it, remove it. It's easier. If someone makes a pull request and you reject it at that moment, they'll be annoyed and upset. Whereas if you merge it and in a few months you slowly rewrite their code, they're not going to notice. So if it doesn't matter, merge it. If it really, really matters and it's just introducing something completely different from what you're building, like if you're building HTTP library and they want to add SMTP in there for some reason, just tell them to make a fork. That's what I do. Like, oh, that's an interesting idea. I don't want to support this right now, but if you want to maintain your own version of it, I'll redirect everyone who's looking for this. And then over time, if it turns out you're wrong and they actually start doing really well, you can merge it back in. Yes?
What do you wish was different about GitHub? Like, what other features could make your life better?
Right. What do I wish was better about GitHub? Reviewing the diffs is pretty weak experience right now. Especially when you're doing open source, you end up reviewing a lot of code. Specifically, like they'll show you the diffs and the surrounding code, but you can't leave any comments on anything outside of that window, which is really annoying. You can't leave any comments on the current state of the tree. So if you're just like looking at some random source thing and you're reading what they wrote, and then you're like, wait, this is wrong, and you want to leave a comment there, you can't do that. You have to leave it on a diff. It always has to be on a diff. I think that's one of the weaknesses of GitHub. That's the main thing I can think of. I mean, there's lots of other things that aren't great about it, but on average, they're doing pretty well over other options. Anyone else? Cool. I think that's it. Thank you for having me.